Hello everyone! With the English release out by the time I'll be uploading this video, it's time to do a heavy undertaking of trying to make you all see the merit of downloading and playing Ensemble Stars music. I've had a very consistent interest in idol media since I was 12, beginning with me stumbling upon clips of the Idolmaster video games. I subsequently discovered Love Live in high school, which if you're even a little bit into anime, you've probably seen Snow Elation mentioned or clipped at least once in your life. Then I crashed headfirst into Ensemble Stars around the same time period. After I saw a CG of Adonis Ultigari and then seeing Rei Sakuma, I discovered the rest of it pretty organically, which was harder than it is now, what with the happy elements bringing the game overseas and the translation community thriving. I wholeheartedly enjoy this game, and I'm not going to feign embarrassment about that because at its core, it's simply the physical manifestation of what happens when you get 50 guys in a room and ask them to sing and dance for your amusement. There's drama, there's jokes, and there's absurd scenarios. So let's get into it, the game that dragged me into an absolute pit, Ensemble Stars. Ensemble Stars, or OnStars for short, is a multimedia project by Happy Elements KK, which is the Japanese branch of China-based company Happy Elements. It began as a spin-off of Ensemble Girls, a visual novel-style card collector game. Unfortunately, Ensemble Girls eventually shut down, despite Happy Ellie's attempts to keep it alive, and even today it still manages to have a semi-dedicated small fandom. Ensemble Stars subsequently took a different route from its predecessor and decided to focus on the idea of a school that produced idols and worked from there. Over the years, it grew astronomically, developing both an avid teen and adult fan base. I call it a multimedia project, but it didn't really start out with that in mind. At its core, it was a simple visual novel style racing sim, but its spike in popularity caused it to get music, merchandise, and anime, and even put on concerts, not to mention the rhythm game being brought to us now. A big question one might have is, how did it get popular? Well, it's actually reasonably simple. It was Happy Element's only game that they could reasonably focus on, and they had pretty great timing. They had developed one game prior to OnStars in Japan, and that was Mercstoria, which some people may know considering it did have a crossover with the Ensemble Stars IP. They also had Last Period, which came after, but neither of them really gained any explosive popularity, mostly because of their so-so quality and people just not being attached to the characters. As for timing, since it was their one singular popular game, they put a ton of effort into it. I don't know whether to call this an opinion or a fact, but many big budget companies aren't very good at treating their idol/generally music-based spin-offs meant for a Josemuki audience well. The development commonly ends up subpar, the marketing is abysmal, and everything surrounding it seems kinda half-baked. So inevitably something had to come along and vacuum up all those fans looking for something shiny and new. And the Japanese branch didn't really have the luxury of ignoring things, since if OnStars hemorrhaged players, they probably would be in big trouble. Obligatory plugging of their newer, lesser-known property before we jump into things, but all the money OnStars has generated allowed them to develop a game called Helios Rising Heroes, which is a self-admitted, campy, superhero mobile game that I find pretty charming. Though that isn't getting localized anytime soon. So if you can tolerate having to read Japanese, I'd suggest checking it out. So now that I've delved into the company, let's talk about the pros and cons. For one, I think the art is pretty cool. I'm not going to call it groundbreaking, if only because it classically follows the anime same face formula, where characters are mostly differentiated by their hair and eyes, but that's a good majority of things that get popular in idle mobile game landscape, and even beyond that. So it's not uniquely bad. Where I think it shines is just the general card design direction and exemplifying character traits. Let's use one of the most recognizable characters, Rei Sakuma, as an example. His biggest traits are his mullet, red eyes, and fangs. Basically the amalgamation of what everybody wants from a subtly homoerotic vampire flick. Coincidentally, his balloon versions, which is the official title for Awakening cards, are filled with a bunch of vampire imagery, and in particular, the artists love to make use of bats whenever they can. Seriously, whenever they can. One more example, Mika Kagehira. If you're even a little bit into anime, Mika is a pretty easy pick out of a lineup. His iconic, two-colored eyes channel the early to mid-2000s DeviantArt era, where every original character had heterochromia, or eyes that change color with their mood. If anything else about him gets you confused, you can always rely on looking at the eyes. Outside of that, I think the art doesn't have any noticeable dips in quality, and generally when it upgrades for everyone. Mostly because I've read this Happy LA keeps most of their art staff in-house. They do not outsource anything, and most of everything that they do, including development, production, and all that stuff, is kept in-house. Some games can be victims to inconsistent quality in a way where the concept is good, but something about the shading or general art kind of ruins it, or for more unpopular characters, they just don't really try at all. But because of what I mentioned with the whole in-house thing, OnStars doesn't really run into that problem. Most of the art issues have to do with the fact that the very concept probably shouldn't have left the drawing board. Second, depending on your preference, the music can be pretty good or a complete assault to your ears, but that's a pretty broad thing, you know. If you were to ask me my preferences, I particularly like Switch, Trickstar, and Double Face's music the most. Ordinarily, I'd play a few clips in my video here, but I'm kind of scared of getting copyrighted because Happy LA is really weird about that, so I'll say SoundCloud is an invaluable asset if you want to take a deep dive into the OnStars discography. To help you out, I'll give a brief rundown of each unit. Trickstar are the protagonists and general mascots of Ensemble Stars, and they live up to the name by doing your classic anime opening or ending type music. They're very shonen influenced, and you can definitely hear that. I suggest a song like Breakthrough. It's one of their more popular ones. Fine does more classical heavy songs with aptly named titles like Holy Angel's Carol and the like, and Valkyrie does the same, but their music emphasizes a darker take on the orchestras and Fine's music, sort of making them polar opposites. Undead does rock, kind of. Their whole thing is being a rebellious unit and not playing by the rules, but nowadays they're sharing their gig with Alkaloid, so I classify them more as pop rock than straight rock comparatively, and they're mostly classified as the open shirt, sexy guys. Ryusei Tai does pure tokusatsu music, which if you're unfamiliar with what tokusatsu is, you know all those special effects, Monster of the Week, and acrobatics type shows, basically stuff like Power Rangers and Kamen Rider. That's tokusatsu. A bit of an oversimplification, and I'm a bit of a tokusatsu nut, but this isn't the video for a deep dive into the genre. Just expect a lot of callouts of their names and songs formatted like their special moves or the title of some Power Rangers episode. Two Wink is synth pop, capitalizing on their more youthful image. A lot of their music comes off playful and mischievous, and it perfectly exemplifies their behavior as a unit. Rabbids' genre is hard for me to nail down, but the best I can give is that it just sounds ultra bright and positive. They're basically the masters of the cute concept in this game, so if you're familiar with that, you probably have an idea of their music. Akatsuki does traditional Japanese music like their namesake suggests, an unspoken mandatory addition to any idol game. You might not get it the first time, but I personally think they're pretty neat, especially with how they implement Japanese dances into their choreography. Knights has had a little bit of a weird musical identity. They used to have some EDM beat drop-esque music, then they kinda haven't nailed down a proper genre. I guess some type of house, but don't quote me on this. I'd recommend the song Silent Oath because it's my favorite, Arashi gets to be center, and it's a generally good song. Picking up where Knights left off, Eden has taken the EDM all the way to the bank. Favoring a more harsher take on it, they really make a name for themselves as another OnStars villain unit. Switch also does heavy EDM style beat drops, but their style relies on more synth stuff. In a way, they're a bit more intense version of Two Wink while still retaining their whimsical image. MAM is only one person, Madara Mikajima, and this is a genre I also have a pretty hard time nailing down. I think in this case, it's better to listen to it yourself rather than rely on my description, but he also sings the anime opening/ending type music we all know and love, plus he has his image as a cowboy. Alkaloid goes for the full-on rock approach in contrast to Undead's pop rock. Above all, the guitar is loud and pretty demanding in the instrumentals. They're marketed as the more rebellious unit of people who are failures rising above that title. Crazy B was supposed to be what I think was a rapper unit, but that was something that floated around when they were revealed and was probably not true, because they do not rap in any of their songs, and thank God for that. I'd say they're more jazz-inspired than anything. And last but not least, Double Face. They kind of don't have much of a musical identity. Whether it's because that's the whole point, or they just don't have enough songs, remains to be seen in my opinion. But the debut track was a jazz-inspired one like Crazy Bees. Alright, Now that we've gotten my weirdly confusing musical description out of the way, let's dive into the big elephant in the room, the story. Ensemble Stars' primary story writer is a man with the pen name Akira. Over time, they've recruited more writers, such as the well-known in the fandom Yuki Yoshino, to do card stories, some event stories, and other small parts of the script. But Akira is the ultimate main scenario writer. If you're looking for the big plot-heavy stuff, you're going to be seeing his name on it. Akira's legacy isn't really too known by most people, mostly because nobody really cares to hunt down his previous writing experience, which I completely understand why. But he did the main scenario for Ensemble Girls and Princess Connect Redive, which fans seem to like well enough, as well as a few light novels I have not and will not be reading because I have zero interest in them. His writing style mainly favors absurdity, a whole host of inner turmoil, and really old references to Japanese literature or movies that even people with Japanese as their native language have to look up. This predictably carries over into Ensemble Stars. OnStars is particularly famous for its really long monologues. You've probably seen that Aichi tweet where he's going on for literal pages to the point it becomes hard to read just from the tweet alone. But while Akira does favor monologues, I promise you, Aichi is kind of the only one who talks like that. It seems to be his unique and interesting quirk to make his paragraph-worthy speeches go on for like 20 minutes. Seriously, he talks. Forever. And people call him out on it multiple times. Regardless, you'll find someone who's kind of a fan of all of it. I find the story a ton of fun, and I'll talk about why. You may recall at the beginning of this video, I stated that I was into idol stuff since I was a kid, so I've had a pretty wide range of media to take in and appreciate as I get older. And OnStars isn't really unique in all the crazy stuff it gets up to. Things like Pretty Rhythm and King of Prism, which may not 100% neatly fall into the idol box, have still given it a run for its money when it comes to absurdity, and even further with implementing more fantastical elements. I think it has a place in the general sphere of stories, just like the most lighthearted or realistic idol games do. What I like about OnStars in particular is Akira as a writer is really good at growing his characters past their pre-assigned tropes or subverting expectations entirely. Someone like Kaoru Hakaze, the skirt-chasing womanizer, is viewed in a completely different light after reading the event story Human Comedy because there's more to him than just liking women. This is because Akira likes to deconstruct things a lot, whether it be by explaining why a character does what they do, or by letting the audience know that there's more to them than initially meets the eye. There's more to the student council president, the very anal hall monitor type, the tokusatsu fanatic, and he'll let you know that. This style of writing is of course not without flaws. I think Akira kind of runs away with his imagination a lot, where character events are lampshaded by various absurd things that kind of take you out of the story. Suspension of disbelief can only take you so far after all. The angst is cool, but the raising stakes and general tone of serious stuff can for sure get to be too much at times. That's because OnStars sometimes tries to blend the normal and the bizarre without fully committing to one or the other, thus giving us a weird bit of dissonance like calling things a war and all that stuff, when the actual description is a bit different in terms of what actually happens. But he's been with this game for like 6 years at this point, and he's not leaving anytime soon considering it's his biggest project to date. There is one more flaw I want to talk about with regards to him, however. His handling of social issues is a bit of a mixed bag. I think he tries, but he also didn't try one bit when first writing this series. For instance, it took him years to suddenly develop an understanding of gender and treat the character of Arashi Narukami's relationship to femininity with proper care and nuance. There has been conflicting information in the fandom for a good decade, but for all intents and purposes, he was attempting to superimpose a trans narrative onto her. His wishy-washiness concerning it is, in my opinion, why there are such debates about the validity of that narrative even today. Not to mention, he didn't really start undoing it until a ways into the event stories, where he finally kind of put it to bed and started undoing the damage that he had brought. I think nowadays he has gotten a bit better at it, but I still take issue with some of the things that he does. Okay, a lot of things. I really do have beef with this guy, but I'm not going to list all of them, just because I think they're kind of specific to me and my insane deep dives into many of his stories, and I can recognize a lot of the common writing conventions he pursues. but he still manages to keep me reading, so he's alright. One thing I have to caution against when getting into this game, though, is the issue that character popularity can play in seeing one of the people you like represented in events or banners, aka the gacha part of the game. Some people might view it as a good thing, as it gives you more time to save for that eventual time they do get a card, but some might be a little annoyed by it. Basically, Happy Elements is most motivated by which character is the most popular at any time, aka what's making them the most money. So there's a bit of a disproportionate focus on their more popular units, at the expense of their least popular ones. I think the only ones who go against this rule are Trickstar, as them being the faces of the entire game gives them the privilege of leading anniversaries and a lot of firsts. In my case, I have a blend of popular and unpopular characters I like, but I have two main idols I really like, Rene Amagi and Madara Mikijima. In Rene's case, he's shiny and new, coming into the franchise pretty late, so he's pushed a lot to catch up with everyone else's legacy content, not to mention he's pretty popular. In Madara's case, he's, at the bottom of the priority list. He has a wealth of story involvement as a 3-star, so you can see my producer days are spent waiting anywhere between 3 to 6 months for Madara's next 5-star card to drop, and then not being surprised Rene has another event in the pipeline, though I think this kind of pain can be felt in many franchises with a mobile game component. So if you're used to it, then go for whoever strikes your fancy. So, now that you've gotten to the end of this long video of me talking up N-Stars, go play it. Or don't. Your taste may vary. But I think a lot of people may be put off from this game at first glance because of fans' tendency to self-deprecate and be negative. But I like this series for what it is. I'm not going to be into something if I dislike it, nor am I going to pretend that I can't disengage from it if I really felt like it was ruining my mood. So I want to share that those who might be interested should definitely pick up the game. If anything, it's part of a long list of idle games I very much enjoy. So head on over to the App Store and hit the install button.